Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Don't you think Alan would have loved this? Did you see the photographs of Alan that were taken the last time he was here last May? The museum director is a photographer as well, and they're just wonderful. There's one at the door, and there are two here after. Come up and take a look at them. The next person is who will be speaking is Greg Masters, and I must say that when I spoke to Bob Rosenthal, he said, oh, we can't have something like this without having Greg Masters speak. And then I thought he was and he said something about he's connected to New Jersey. So I call up his number in New Jersey, what I think is New Jersey, and I kept getting this woman who screamed at me and hung up on me repeatedly and finally said, there is no Greg Masters here. And then I called Bob and he said, that's because he lives in New York. So Greg, you'll have to really introduce yourself in terms of your connection to Alan, but I'd like to welcome Greg Masters up here to give his reminiscences and thoughts about Alan. Greg Masters.
Thank you, Maria. I grew up in Passaic, and you know, I was in high school when I discovered Howell, and to find out that Alan grew up in Paterson, you know, just added to the accessibility for me. You know, besides I had pride that this poet was a neighbor, and it just encouraged me. It just made me feel less alien, and then, well, I'll read my piece. No more pretty poems. Allen Ginsberg rejected the choice of creating fine art, the object of beauty crafted into being for the bemusement of a privileged art-viewing public. His message was too urgent to pretty up in pretensions of an assumed authority with all the appearances of an acceptable museum piece. The importance of the Beat movement was its choice to speak in excited but accessible language, to be the art of the common and working class person who experiences the same exaltations and sufferings as anyone else, who hadn't yet been the subject of art. Allen set himself up as the newscaster of the local and personal news to broadcast messages not available in mainstream media. I can still, well, I just said all this. Allen's passionate tone revealed a human presence I hadn't encountered yet in books. It was a jagged, celebratory music, part Jewish vaudeville, part 20th century anxious, that I immediately connected to. It seemed an antidote from the antiseptic authoritarian voices who hid true values behind an urge to sell something, whether it was a product or credibility. That Howell penetrated into the suburbs attests to the simple truth that it was needed. It showed the ugly, it spoke for the marginalized, invisibilized voices denied access to the networks or movie screens. It spoke of what America had deemed unspeakable. As America campaigned to sell itself as prosperous and immaculate, Allen poked through the facade to reveal and expose the underside. Most important, these poems accepted and respected the self. They weren't straining to deny the core human presence beneath the skin, which was the message I was being sold from everywhere else. His poems spoke of feelings that didn't fit control categories. They were complicated. We could leave the simple definitions of allegory behind. It was modern times. It wasn't a case of good versus evil anymore. He was willing to be vulnerable enough to confess that he wasn't an authority. He refused to speak from a position of power. I loved living in the same building as him for 20 years. I loved running into him in the hallway of our building, or shopping for groceries on First Avenue, or coming in from the airport on one of his constant excursions. I loved that he was a local presence in the East Village poetry community centered at the Poetry Project. As a board member of the Poetry Project, I'm grateful to him for all the benefits he participated in, how he very willingly allowed us to use him. And he provided this service to local poetry communities all over the planet. He was a jet-age troubadour, constantly promoting poetry and the personal and communal poetic experience. There was no one like Alan. He was involved in so many fronts: political expose, sexual liberation, integration of influences from all over the planet, acceptance of personal psychologic truths. He honored the personality by publicly exposing the core of his being. He taught us so much, collecting skull-cracking data, voyaging geographically and into the innermost being, and always chronicling his discoveries, shaping his experience and response into poems, songs, or journal, so as to constantly and chronically celebrate every breath, every aspect of living on Earth. Thanks.
Before I introduce Joel Gadamak, I'd also like to say that not only is Edith Ginsberg, Alan's stepmother, here with us today, and I know that a lot of you were here when we had the Paterson Poetry Marathon last year, and the many other times that Alan came here, bringing his stepmother with him, and how wonderful it always was to see how close they were and how much he cared about her, and how he always said, "I'm sorry, but first I have to go say hello to my stepmother or my mother." And he would run over to say hello to Edith. Also, his aunt, I want to call her Honey, Hannah Litsky, is here as well. So she's sitting next to Edith in the front in case you want to say hello to her. She also has been at several of the programs that Alan was involved with, and I just wanted to acknowledge your presence here today. And now I'm going to introduce Joel Gadamak, and Joel Gadamak is Alan's cousin. He grew up with Alan, and I hope he's going to share with us some of his memories of Alan as a young man and a young boy and their growing up experiences. Joel Gadamak.
Thank you. It's good to be here today. I would like to introduce Hannah Honey Litsky. Her name was Ginsberg, maiden name, and I want to introduce also Edith Ginsberg, Louis' wife. I'd like them to stand up. These are remarkable women. They're very young and wonderful friends. I guess Honey's big claim to fame is that she was Philip Roth's English teacher, and they're still in touch. What I really want to do is to go back to Alan's roots. He just didn't become a poet. He followed in the footsteps of his father, Louis, who was a Paterson poet, a wonderful man and a teacher. And certainly inspired Alan and his brother Eugene, Eugene Brooks Ginsberg. Eugene dropped the Ginsberg at some time after his marriage. But what I would like to do now is to read some poems that I think are very significant. In Lewis's book, Collected Poems, this was produced by the University of Maine Press, he has a poem called My Sons Watch Out. My sons watch out. This is a dangerous age. Our history's trapped. Our century leaks disaster. Guffaws fall out from every civics page. Fissions of men and atoms react faster. More dangerous is the avenue. The girls, they walk abroad like subtle conflagrations, ambushed with opulence. Apparel curls, with beasts portentous for new generations. Slow holocausts are hiding in their hair. Fed by white limbs, soft fires swarm about. Inflammable and fissionable bodies there work havoc in their passing by. Watch out. Another poem is called The Answer of Death. And the one thing that I became very familiar with as I knew these people through the years, and I've known them ever since I was, 4 or 5, was that they were always preoccupied with death. Certainly immortality, life, love, and hate. But death always pervaded. This poem is significant in that the last stanza is engraved on Louis' tombstone in the cemetery that Bob Rosenthal mentioned. The answer of death. Questions about which we pray from tombstone to tombstone ricochet. Retort of death to heal our hurt is granite comment, grave and curt. To all our anguish is deigned a dense word of stony reticence. All our petitions founder on laconic marble lexicon. Thus, the stillness always will be lockjawed upon mystery. Death has one answer, one alone, explaining a riddle with a stone. The stone that he's referring to is called a simon, and in the Jewish faith, when the Jews visit the dead, they will take a stone and put it up on top of the main tombstone, and that signifies that they've been there. And so he's talking about this, explaining a riddle with a stone, and that's that. I want to also say that Alan's brother Eugene, not here today, was quite an exemplary poet. And according to Anne Honey, and this is no insult to Alan or to Louis, he was the finest of the 3 poets. This is a poem that Eugene wrote for Alan after his death. Poem for Allen Ginsberg. Wherever you hover, spirit, mind deep in space, where God signs his name in hydrogen italics among Oort cloud comets that brought water to earth for our throats' thirsts and tears for our eyes, or drifting over mountain crags west of Boulder, where you touch ethereal fingers to wingtips of eagles, or under the world's oceans, admonishing sharks to clamp their teeth into little fish more thoughtfully, or lounging among Cherry Valley ferns, watching with Daisy's eyes through a lattice of tree twigs, a red sun sliver slide below the horizon's rim, nightfall crickets chirp the compact epics of their lives, or sitting with us invisible in the 13th Street 5th floor Erie as church bells toll the heartbeat of time into song. Now you know all, Alan. While earthbound our senses fail, you can see time gone and time to come, how the cosmos started and ends, how the rose builds its lovely carbon body out of photons and rain. You watch the long-legged stripling toss basketballs through hoops. Move on. You're past all sex. Well, hardline capitalism triumphed in your time. It had to, crushing your outcries in a torrent of plastic Toyotas, color TV, computers, digital discs. The doe-eyed, the misfits still cram jails and bug houses. The statue of David shines in the academy, while Europe and Africa pile up their corpse mountains. So shower your pity on the nation you scolded. Pity our soldier dragged in Kigali's dust. Pity the homeless in their cardboard chapels. Pity the neck-slashed girl and the death cell half-wit. Pity our midnight soul fears and dark dream tremors. Pity our workplace gouging of each other. that our children not fall under the spiked wheel of poverty. Pity the comrades you wordlessly deserted. Pity your brother's self-pity, the vanity of his grief. Pity the human race, its illusion of permanence. That was written by Eugene in 1907. I also want to say that I'm Alan's oldest fan and greatest admirer. I was exposed to Alan when he was a child. My recollections go back to 1936, when we spent summers together in Belmar, when he came to our house every Sunday. Excuse me. My mother was Rose, the famous poem that he wrote, and the beloved sister of Louis Ginsberg. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Laura Boss, and Laura Boss is the editor of Lips magazine, a really wonderful poet, certainly in the Allen Ginsberg tradition, and somebody who was a friend of Allen Ginsberg's and who would like to speak today about him. Laura Boss.
Well, like almost everyone in this room, I probably have a couple of stories, as you do, about Allen, and I couldn't make up my mind which one to talk about. The first time I met Allen was at the Great Falls Festival in the 70s, and I was backing up my car and almost ran him over. And I remember his red shirt and his suspenders. He's with his entourage, and he was like really making not such friendly remarks to me. And then whenever he signed everyone's books, he would ask their names, and then he would sign his name, but he didn't ask me my name. He just signed his name to my book. And so that was my first time. And then I met him again. I actually got to meet his stepmother, Edith. I sat next to her, I think it was at William Paterson. And this time, after my reading, I actually got a kiss from Allen, so that was a little better start. And but I think I really got to know Allen when I was living with Gregory Corso, or rather Gregory Corso was living with me. And we were, and that was really, I was very fortunate to have a chance to meet Allen that way. And though we didn't meet too often, it was always very intense. And I thought, well, maybe I can tell this story about, I think it was his 57th birthday. It was in 1983, and we had this little birthday dinner at the Odeon, and it was Gregory and myself and his cousin Mindy and Brian, and I think it was Lucian and Lucian's wife, whose name I don't remember, but I do remember the wonderful blue denim jacket she wore. And we wrote this collaborative poem, which was really, I thought, absolutely awful. Everybody contributed a line, so. But maybe I'm wrong, but anyway. And then I got to know Allen again several times. In 1984, I went to his reading at Stevens, and he came back to my house, and it was just the two of us for dinner. It was not, again, an auspicious meeting. At the beginning, I'd had a flat tire. I seemed to have a lot of car problems when I was with Allen, and he came back, but it was a really, really good evening, and I wrote a poem about it called, which I'm not going to read to you now, let's see what the name is, the night Allen Ginsberg refused to go to a bar, when a guy asked him to go to the bar scene in Hoboken and said, I have a date with Laura. So, and then I had, and then another time was when he was reading at the United Nations for CCC, and I was lucky enough to be able to drive him home, and walking to my car, he stopped, and I had never seen anybody do this. He stopped to talk to a homeless man who was perched across the street from the United Nations in a door, and he really spoke to him. He really looked at him, he really spoke to him, and that taught me a lot, although the homeless man wasn't especially communicative or appreciative. So, and then the other thing, but I think the story I'm going to tell is, and I'll tell it very briefly, is the last time I saw Alan, and somehow or other, it was at the Paterson Marathon. Maria had done this, he had done this wonderful reading, and Maria had put this whole tremendous marathon together, and I wound up having dinner at the, I think it's La Trattoria off Chianchi with Alan and his stepmother Edith. And the one consistent thing I always saw with Alan was his loyalty and courtesy to his stepmother. I mean, it was really, like, you know, you talk about all the problems in families, and I think that part of Alan's loyalty that everyone in this room knows about was also due to the example of loyalty that Edith set for him. And I think it was this kind of reciprocal, really beautiful thing to see. So anyway, we were having dinner, and there wasn't a table for us. So we were sitting at the bar, and I was really, and Alan always surprised me, I was really quite astounded to hear him talking about, I think what Rochelle was talking about, the salt intake of food. I mean, just didn't seem what I'd expect. And then Barack was about 2 seats away at the bar, and he was also talking about the salt context. So it was like a little surrealistic for me. And then what happened when I usually saw Alan was this, and I'll tell you what I did. I interrupted Edith as Edith was speaking, and Alan started to lecture me on my lack of control or my enthusiasm, and he was absolutely right. And so I was a little intimidated, but anyway, he was right, and I said, oh, you know, learning. And then he said that he was taking me out to dinner because it was Mother's Day, and I wanted to pay my own way. And he said, "No, it's Mother's Day. I'll pay for you." And then, and this was so typically Alan, after the Mother's Day gift of the dinner, he asked me if I had ever slept with this 23-year-old guy that he had loved. So, and that was sort of like typical of the kind of relationship we had, because Alan was like always surprising, and he continued to surprise me even after his death. Mark McGarity of the Star Ledger called me up for a quote after Alan died, and he said to me that, although he didn't use my quote, I wasn't, I guess, that good, but anyway, he said to me, and here's where Alan continued to surprise me, that he had asked Alan in October when he had that article in the Star Ledger, and if you remember, it had a picture of Edith and Alan and walking down at the falls, some of the New Jersey poets that he liked, and Alan mentioned my name. And that was a very big thing to me, because like all of you, like Alan was, in a sense, a far-off mentor to me, but someone who was very influential in kind of candor and honesty that he had. So that was like a little like, that was kind of surprise, and in a way, it was the kind of thing that in a sense, wasn't so surprising from Alan, that he would continue to surprise you as he does all of us with his poetry, and will for years and years. And I just want to say, like all of you, I'll miss Alan very much. Thank you very much.